My name's Wade Wingler, and I'm blessed and honored to be the president and CEO of Noble. At Noble, we've been serving individuals with disabilities for generations. We serve babies and toddlers, we work with kids in summer camp, we work with folks who are exiting high school and moving into the workplace, and even do living services with people throughout their entire lifespan. We serve the entire section of central Indiana, so the Donut County and the metropolitan area, and other areas throughout the state of Indiana. So there were institutions throughout most of the United States. When I was a kid, I had a close friend of the family who had a disability. He had autism and mild cerebral palsy. And when we were little, we were always told, make sure that Andy doesn't end up in Central State or one of the institutions.
We've just seen something that's probably the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. Is that typical of ward life? Yes, there are 5,300 patients at Willowbrook, which is the largest institution for the mentally retarded in the world. The ones that we saw were the most severely and profoundly retarded. There are thousands there like that, not going to school, sitting on the ward all day, not being talked to by anyone, only one or two or three people to take care of 70 people on the ward, sharing the same toilet, contracting the same diseases together. 100% of patients at Willowbrook contract hepatitis within 6 months of being in the institution. Most patients at some time in their life have parasites. The incidence of pneumonias is greater than any other group of people that I think exist in this country. Trauma is severe because these patients are left together on a ward, 70 retarded people, basically unattended, fighting for a small scrap of paper on the floor to play with, fighting for the attention of the attendants who are overworked, trying to clean them, feed them, clothe them, and if possible pay a little attention to them and work with them and develop their intelligence. But what in fact happens is that they go downhill.
In the Geraldo Rivera piece on Willowbrook, there was some pretty atrocious things happening there, but it wasn't just in upstate New York or in New York where those things were happening. That happened throughout the country. And the great thing about Noble is we have always been part of the solution. We were instrumental as those institutions were shuttered in Indiana in creating a set of services that people with disabilities could enjoy their life and enjoy their independence outside of institutions, living out in the community. And so it's kind of been a lifelong charge for me to figure out how do we serve people with disabilities with dignity in their community and in their homes without relegating them to institutions. When I was an undergraduate at Butler in the early 90s, I actually had the opportunity to go and work at Central State one summer as an intern. And what I saw there was not only frightening, but it was wrong. We learned in our new hire orientation how to do things like physical restraints and chemical restraints. We were even taught how to be careful when there was a syringe with Haldol being used to chemically sedate somebody to make sure that we didn't get sedated as well. So back then, in those days when institutions were still happening, we thought that was the best kind of care that could happen for somebody. But we kind of knew that there was something not quite right going on there. And so it wasn't long thereafter when the institutions were shut down in the state of Indiana, and we really moved wholeheartedly into home and community-based services.
In 2013, Wabash Center had their 60th anniversary of when it was set up by a group of concerned parents who wanted more for their children with disabilities than what the state and the local community would provide. So I decided to start looking into the history behind my brother. He is he's about 16 months older than me, so we're pretty close to the same age. And I remember that he was a real handful a really cute kid. He went to programs at Noble Center, or it was called Noble School back then. I remember when Roy Rogers and Dale Evans came to Noble School, and my mom took me along with my brother and sister to see them. And there was a little gathering room with a piano, and Roy Rogers sang, and I had my little cowgirl outfit on with my suede and my hat and all of that. And that was a wonderful type of program that we had. And I remember that specifically. And I also remember bad things too. I remember when my brother was sent to Central State Hospital, and we would go visit him after church every Sunday, and I was probably 10, 11, somewhere in that age. And I remember him coming out through the door of this big brick edifice, and because we were never allowed to go inside. And he had bruises all over his arms, and he had scabs. And I remember seeing these round scabs on his arm when I was a kid, and I just knew that something evil was going on there. But I was scared and absolutely mortified, and I couldn't talk about it with my parents because it was just horrible. So I decided in 2013 that I was going to look into this. I was going to face it head on and find out what had happened to my brother. So I contacted the state archives, because that's where all the Central State files are kept, and I had to get permission from my mom to go, even though I was his guardian. And I drove down there. It's in Indianapolis somewhere here. And I spent 5 hours. They had the files all pulled for me. It was all on microfiche. And they were ready for me. And they sat me down, and I went through about 2,000 pages in 5 hours, including a short break for lunch. So as you know, I was reading very, very quickly, skimming as much as I could. And it wasn't always easy to read because it was microfiche. And the stuff that I saw would turn my stomach. I remember those round scabs on him because one of the doctor's reports had on there that there were round marks on his hand that nobody knew where they came from. And nobody bothered to look into it. There was no resolution to it. But to me, they look like cigarette burns. And I know that a lot more people smoked back then, and I suspect that they were cigarette burns that were all over my brother's arms. And the scratches and scrapes, those were from either the caretakers or some of the other patients at Central State Hospital. And then I found this report that showed that my brother had received a concussion. He had been beaten so badly that he had to go into the clinic at Central State. And the doctor mentioned this. It's signed by the doctor. He's probably long gone. But he received a concussion, and they didn't know where it came from. And again, there was never any follow-up report or resolution on what had happened. To be beaten to the point where you have a concussion, what does that do to you later in life? And being on all kinds of medications to do nothing but sedate you, what does that do to your life and to your health? So I know that was horrible for him, but it was horrible for me as a child, knowing that evil things were happening inside Central State Hospital walls, and I couldn't do anything about it.
And then it was doubly horrifying as an adult to know that that kind of stuff was going on back then, and nobody cared. They didn't close Central State down until 1994. One other piece of information I found going through his files was the number of times that he was tied up. They had a whole checklist. That's what it was made for. They had codes on how they were tied up and how long they were tied up, whether they were tied to their bed, by their arms, or by their legs, or by both. If they were tied to their chair, by their arms, by their legs, or by both, and how many hours they stayed there. There were many days where my brother stayed tied up much longer than he was not tied up. And that was just a regular way of doing business back there. He's a joy for all that he went through, the abuse that he took physically and mentally. He is the gentlest person you would ever want to meet, and how he has developed that grace inside of him. I don't know how he does it. I would not be able to be the kind of good person that he is after experiencing 29 years of hell. But he's thankful for everything that he has. He smiles at people, he says hello, he wants to shake your hand. He's just a very positive person.
In the videos that you're seeing today about Willowbrook and Central State, you're getting a peek behind the curtain at what institutions used to look like. I was there. I worked in those institutions, and I saw a lot of the same horrors and atrocities that you are seeing in these videos. We can't go back there. As a people, we can't move back to institutionalized services. They're not humane. They don't embrace the dignity of people with disabilities. They don't move them toward a more independent life. And research shows that institutions actually cost more than home and community-based services. So we have to, as a people group, be firm in our voice and acknowledge and say out loud that institutions are not the way that we need to be supporting our friends and neighbors with disabilities. So as new staff, and for all of us, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we don't go back to those poor qualities of care in institutions. And to help with that, to guard against that, at Noble, we have created a thing that we call the CARE framework. And CARE stands for competencies, accountability, resources, and education. And the idea behind that is if our staff are competent and held accountable and have the resources and education they need to do their jobs, it will seem like we care. And as new staff, I know you're here because you care. You're here because you want to be part of an organization and an industry that really does serve our community and our friends and neighbors with disabilities. So now that you've had a chance to see some of this video content, what kind of things can you do to make sure that we don't end up sliding back toward poor quality of care and institutionalization? As somebody who was raised with a person with a disability and has worked for over 35 years in this industry, quality of care matters. How we treat people matters. We cannot go back to institutional care or anything that looks like that. Not on your watch, not on my watch. We will not go back there again.